Welcome to the Thriving Farmer Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Kilpatrick. Our mission is to inspire, educate, and celebrate sustainable farming. We believe that you can build a profitable, sustainable farm that gives you true farm freedom. Join us as we talk to farmers, innovators, educators, and entrepreneurs to glean their top takeaways in business and life. Hey, Thriving Farmers, Michael Kilpatrick here with yet another episode of the Thriving Farmer Podcast. Today, I'm privileged to have Andrew Couzens, who is from Terra Flora Organics. Now, Andrew spent 2 decades in software engineering and eventually arrived at the conclusion that his talents would be better spent working with nature in the physical, real world than furthering development of the digital one, which has been demonstrated to disconnect individuals from nature in spite of never being more connected. There's never been a greater need for people to produce sustainable solutions to managing our footprint on this planet and the need to relocalize food production that has reached a climax. Welcome to the podcast.
Michael, thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be here, and it's a real privilege to get to speak with you about, what's a really popular topic right now. It's gone beyond romance, and there's a lot of interest in achieving some of what I mentioned in my little bio there.
Yeah, absolutely. So how did you get into organic farming? I mean, you're coming from software engineering. What was the kind of transition?
Yeah, I've had inflammatory bowel disease my whole life. Started, had a really bad staph infection when I was a little kid. Went in for surgery and I came out of the hospital. I was breaking out in boils.
Oh gosh.
Like biblical level Job kind of boils. That went on for 2-3 years. And then I developed the inflammatory bowel disease. I was going to the bathroom 12 to 15 times a day. It didn't matter where I was. I had to be near a bathroom. So I had anxiety all the time. Really just no one knew anything. No doctor could help. I tried all kinds of medications, like you name it, I tried it. And eventually it came down to glyphosate, Roundup.
Really?
Yeah, I went on my honeymoon to Europe, and I thought it was gluten like everybody else, right?
Yeah.
Thought I was gluten intolerant, and by cutting out the wheat, it really did improve. And so that, I went to Europe, and my wife was really jet lagged, and we were in Paris, and I'm thinking, I don't care if I have diarrhea for the next week. I'm eating pastries, and I didn't get sick. And not only did I not get sick, I felt great. And this went on in Italy and in Greece. And when I got back home, I thought I was cured. I started eating those foods again and immediately got sick. So I started digging, and Roundup is banned in those countries. And so did a little bit more digging and found out that Western Canada, where I live, is actually ground zero for the most Roundup use of all foods examined. That Health Canada, I think in 2015 or so, they sampled all foods imported into Canada and all foods grown. And that's where they found foods grown in Western Canada had the most Roundup of anything imported from anywhere around the world. So no wonder I was sick. And as I removed those foods, I was like, well, the Fraser Valley where I live, where is a lot of food is produced here.
Yeah.
They all use Roundup. Like there's not a lot of organic farming going on. So I recognized that if I wanted to take care of myself, I needed to grow my own food.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So, and the thing is, like, the government really doesn't do anything about the glyphosate. They just kind of let it happen still. I mean,
Michael, it's worse than that. Just before Justin Trudeau, who's our prime minister, just before he got elected, he called an election suddenly. The government was trying to increase the amount of glyphosate allowed to be used, and they tabled it because all of a sudden there was this election called. So that's what's on their mind. They're actively trying to use more of it, and that's very scary, because we know that we actually need to go in a completely different direction. But that's not going to put any hate on anybody. It's just, this is the reality of the conventional agricultural system and where it's at. The earth is fighting back. The biology is becoming resistant, as it does. So using more, that's we all know that doesn't work. It's just going to exacerbate the problem.
All right, so that was the background, and then you said start growing your own food.
Yeah, and that was kind of interesting. I was already a gardener. I grew tomatoes and cucumbers, your summer stuff, right? But I was a Miracle Grow gardener, and I had a little rental place before I met my wife, and I had this really sweet Asian landlord, and she would do really strange things like burying white stuff, which I can only guess was like yogurt or some kind of labs, lactic acid bacteria serum, or the curds from that process. And I noted that although my garden took off and was huge and it was like roaring, it eventually became overcome with pests. And her plot, which is just 10, 15 feet away, it not only did not get blight like all of my squash did, it thrived, and it went on over a month and a half longer into the shoulder season, into September, October. It just blew me away. So that was my kind of first experience with what is beyond organic or regenerative agricultural practices, right? That kind of farming. And so when I started trying to actually grow food, I started a market garden in 2019. I knew that's where I wanted to go, and I took a course by a guy, Dan Ostenbrink. He runs a 26-acre market garden here in Chilliwack, BC, and he put on a course that he called a no-till gardening course, and he just blew my mind with the knowledge of how a plant will trade its exudates, its energy that it creates from photosynthesis, with the soil food web below. And if you give it Miracle Grow, it's not going to do that. I'm sure everyone listening is familiar with that concept. And so if you kill the biology by starving it, of course you get unhealthy plants, you get imbalance, you get disease, you get pest pressure, all these things happen. So that's where I'm at now, is trying to drive this knowledge forward by teaching it to people. And that's why I started Terra Flora, was both to provide inputs, right? For I think supplements for plants. I often think of our soil amendments as probiotics. And so that's where that word comes from. But yeah, that's the goal, is to provide them for people, because I know that there's others in the same position as me, and also, someone's got to help these conventional farmers switch.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, there needs to be a big change in our food system. And a lot of people like to say there's lots of information out there, but I think one of the things too is that everyone receives information a little bit differently. And so we need to have a variety of teaching styles and a lot of different people teaching it, and that will help it, grow more.
Couldn't agree more. There should be a teacher in every town,
All right, so let's talk a little bit about you started growing. What kind of things does your farm now kind of what things do you grow, and then what kind of things do you sell, and how do you do that?
So we have a half-acre market garden lab, is what it actually is, because I use the traditional market garden style, 30-inch beds. They're 100-foot long. And we primarily grow alliums like garlic and leeks. And that's just because, while I was working full-time and starting to garden, it just made sense to grow things that didn't require a lot of effort, right? Intensive for a few days while you get it prepped, and then, you come back 6-8 months later. And then my wife, who's a florist, the more I began to learn about the floral industry, and, as it's connected to pesticide use and waste, plastic, shipping, diesel, like all this stuff, right? And being frustrated as logistical problems started to mount, we decided to also grow flowers. So on the one side we grow the alliums, and on the other side, about half of it we grow dahlias. Again, a low, low maintenance kind of plant, and some peonies, some ranunculus and anemones. And that was to enable her to have her own supply of really quality blooms that were pesticide free, to work with, and trying to sort of push that movement of getting brides to choose local blooms. And that's an amazing thing that's been happening with, we think of at least as far as Hollywood's concerned, bridezilla, these are difficult women, it's their special day. But what we found is this new generation of beautiful women that are coming along are saying, no, I'm gonna choose what's local. I'm gonna use what is sustainably grown. And so that's our sort of it's where we learn, the lab, right? We experiment and play around. And then I have my worm farm, which is at another location, and that is it's about a 2,500 square foot production facility, and then about 5 acres of composting. And we produce all kinds of compost and inputs. We do some natural farming inputs like fish amino acid and bokashi inoculant, and premium biodynamic compost with a focus on being fungally balanced and even fungally dominant, which is key, because getting the fungi back in the soil, when you think about soil disturbance, it's the fungi get hurt the most. It's bacteria do too, because they use those fungal strands to mobilize themselves throughout the field. But certainly fungi seem to have been hit the worst. So there's a lot of effort and focus on getting very, very diverse fungal biology into our various products.
All right. So a lot of what you're doing then is you're selling things that normal farms don't sell. I mean, I don't think there's a lot of farms selling your types of products.
No, there's one or two that we're selling what people call worm castings, which I prefer the term vermicompost or vermicast, because truthfully, you can't collect everything that comes out of the butt of a worm. You're getting other stuff, and we're tailoring that recipe with growth hormones and growth enzymes, and things that have been demonstrated to really just improve the health and vitality of the plants to get in touch with. So although it's, we call it worm castings, but truthfully, it's a carefully engineered probiotic. And the goal is to just a brief aside for those who are sort of new to organic farming. When you think about a baby, it's born, the very best case for a baby is to have a vaginal birth, and there it gets inoculated with its immune system, and then to be breastfed. And so in the context of a seed, the very best thing for that seed is to be germinated not into sterile soil, which is what all potting mixes are. And you even read most seed packages, it says sterile.
Yeah.
And that's just, there could be nothing farther from the truth for the beyond organic grower. So by putting that taproot, that little root that comes out, right into touch with the most diverse set of microorganisms possible, it can then select who it wants to work with. And then when you take that transplant out into the field, it's set. As long as you've got the minerality and you've got your water dialed in and you've got good sun exposure and wind protection, the other needs for that plant, it will do very, very well. And so it's a very cost-effective way to apply compost. I mean, compost is very expensive to apply. And I know a lot of market gardeners really struggle with trying to produce enough. And that's where vermicompost just sings. If as long as you've got your mulching layer that you can produce to protect that soil food web biology, getting some vermicompost in touch with the roots of a plant, right as it germinates would be the very best. And then if not, at least when you transplant. So in the case of like our garlic, we put about a tablespoon of worm castings in the hole that with each clove, and that's it. And we have seen phenomenal storage life and growth and resilience to common pest issues. And we also don't rotate our beds. We do rotate in the sense that there's a crop or two that will follow the garlic, but then we throw garlic right back in there. And we attribute that to just the diversity of biology that's in the soil.
Well, I mean, let's break this down a little bit. I mean, in nature, garlic would typically follow garlic.
Yeah, it would sit there and it would be dormant.
Yep.
And then, and we've seen it, the volunteers come up. If you, you chop your bulbils and leave them in there, or you just, you just left it to go on its own, it would just do its own thing. And in the meantime, what would happen is weeds would grow, or something else would naturally grow in nature. I mean, we don't see these issues in nature. It's only when we monocrop that we see, issues with farming. So you can remediate that by following it with, like, I like to follow it with hackeri, like a Tokyo turnip, or a very fast growing, fast maturing vegetable. And then failing that, some type of easy to terminate cover crop. The holy grail here is always, always, always living root. If you can, a living root, it's worth the effort. If you're listening to this and you're thinking it's just so much easier for me to cover my bed in a tarp, you're much better off not doing that. You're much better off putting something in there and then maybe terminating that with a tarp. But tarping a bed for the end of the season, is just inferior to what you can do when you've got a living root in there.
Okay, gotcha. All right, so let's talk about someone who may not want to put like vermicompost in every single bulb hole for, let's say, their garlic. Can they spread it on top of the bed? Can they use the vermicompost to make a compost tea? How does that work?
Well, because we've got so much of it, we are happy to apply it, topically, and that's a very wasteful way to apply vermicompost, because its benefit is in most of its benefit is in getting it in touch with the root. The secondary benefit is actually applying it in the late season, and where the degraders will go to work. So that's kind of cool. And I would say my go-to method would be a vermicompost extract, and then I would apply it as a liquid. And if in the case of growing plants, I would use a liquid. You're going to get much more bang for your buck. Get it on, in and around the root. You can also, we love a product called C90, and we use it in everything that we do for trace elements and minerals. And, we get the underside of those leaves, and we really just take advantage of the ease of watering, and even, plumbing it into your overhead watering. So you could do applications like that. Definitely, water solubility, like, you've got when you use a product like C90, rock dusts are great. But getting them to traverse down into the soil, that's, obviously very challenging. You've got to get the higher members of the soil food web, like the worms and the other beetles and things, to move it around. Whereas if you use a liquid application and all your nutrients in there and water soluble, boom, right, goes right where it needs to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Now let's talk a little bit about the worm, because I know there's a lot of people that would like to add worms to their farm, including myself, but we feel overwhelmed by the concept, and we're like, okay, what's the easiest way if we just want to get more worms on our farm and actually, create a system? Because one of the things we've got is we produce 20 to 40 trays of microgreens every single week. And, that's incredible soil, but there's all those root pieces and pieces of microgreen. I'd love to kind of run that through a worm operation before that goes back into our farm.
Yeah, unquestionably. That's, everybody should have a worm bin. It doesn't matter how big or small, you should have one. It makes sense to be able to capture that activity. And if you can't do that, you can still, when you think about compost, a properly made compost is at least 12 months old. If it's anything less than that, then you're just lacking the microbial diversity that takes place, when you just let things age that long. There's a fellow, Dr. David Johnson out of New Mexico. He actually, I think he's with the University of New Mexico, had access to equipment to examine the biology, to actually the genetic makeup, and identify, the diversity of microbes. And there's a 4-fold increase, 4 times when you hit that 12-month range. So, and what is also happening at that time is the worms will have been through. So allowing a pile enough time for the compost worms to naturally move in from your environment and to go through your pile, that's key. I mean, that's technically a vermicompost now, isn't it? Right? The worms have been through it. It's just not as concentrated, but as you're applying it in a blanket kind of way, right? Throwing down 2 inches on your beds or whatever, it's very effective. So, you know, and it's contextual, right? Everybody has to take a look at, you know, how much space they have, how much time they have, what's their weather like. That will dictate how you would vermicompost, but it's something that can be done indoors. There's a really great system called the Hungry Bin. It's like 120 liter capacity, the same form factor as most recycling bins on wheels. And it produces a phenomenal vermicompost because it takes about a year from the time you put something in the top to the time it comes out the bottom. And it takes this style of system, which is known as a flow-through bin, it really takes the complexity out of worm farming for beginners, you know, because it mimics like nature. It takes a chunk of the earth and it uses gravity to ensure that it's always moisturized, always hydrated to the perfect natural amount. So it doesn't go anaerobic and it just produces the most beautiful worm casting. And even if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to get a quality casting out of that. And of course, it's not hard to scale that thing up. If you're handy with a welder or you know somebody that is, you can create your own flow through bin. And I would recommend that your listeners get a book by Rhonda Sherman, The Worm Farmer's Handbook. She's visited all these amazing worm farms and commercial, many different sizes, right? Small to the very, very big, and shows so much information that anyone who's, you know, farmers are smart people. They're actually engineers for the most part. So I'm confident that kind of information, you can find a system that works for you. And you just have to try. You know, you might not, you know, I've been through 3 or 4 different iterations of a worm bin before I found out like what was going to work for me in my context, which is we're in a rainforest. We get exceptional amounts of rain. And if you want to do something outdoors, you know, that presents a lot of challenges. So definitely not being afraid to just try it. And, you know, over even a couple of years until you find what's working for you, but make the effort as a farmer. I know it's easier. You could produce more if you just didn't have to worry about it. But when you think about relocalizing food supply, you certainly need some expert in your local town at the very least, you know? And if that expert doesn't exist, well, maybe it's you. Maybe it could be you.
So, all right. So worms, what do they need to survive?
They want moisture, ideally 60% or more. Obviously, they don't want to drown. And if you take a bucket of soil and you filled it with water and the bottom was perforated, you would eventually find it would probably sit around 75-80% moisture. And that's, worms really enjoy that. And they also, now it depends on where you live, but compost worms, the one that's most known is the red wiggler, Icenia fetida. That's a manure worm, and it likes to operate between 15 and 25 degrees Celsius. So 15, what is that? That's 60 degrees. That's like 60 to maybe 80 Fahrenheit. And if you keep them in that range, that's when they're most prolific. But what we have found is that they are happy to work even at lower temperatures. They certainly don't like much hotter, that's for sure. At that point, you know, you're going to want to switch to something like an African night crawler or something like that. But what I would really like to encourage is to select your worms locally, because they've been regionally adapted by the weather in your area. So for example, you know, outdoors, you want a worm that knows how to deal with -20, -30, or whatever it is in your area. And conversely, you know, the other end. I mean, BC got just absolutely murdered this year with fires, and then we got floods. We had a heat dome, and then we just had an epic freeze. I mean, just brutal temperatures, and we personally lost quite a few worms in the heat dome. And you know, because we have a 40-foot high cube lab shipping container, and didn't have AC. We were putting frozen water bottles on the top of these bins to try and help them out.
Yeah.
But when it hit 46 degrees, 42 degrees Celsius. What is that?
107.
107 wow. Fahrenheit. And of course, we lost a whole bunch of worms. But on the whole, we didn't lose everything in there. And because they were, they're local, they were able to deal with it. And conversely, on the other side, when we got the very, very cold temperatures here, we just broke records with freezing temperatures, minus 22 with wind chill for, I think, a week here. And that's highly unusual for where we are. And so that's where the indigenous microorganisms, those indigenous soil food web members are key. So if you source them from your environment, that's best. I originally had worms. I think they're from Alabama. Someone was raising them somewhere down in the South in the States. And, early on, I had a hard time. I was killing them a lot. Yeah. And so, I actually switched to starting all over, and I sourced my worms locally. It starts by just turn over a cow patty. You want to know who's eating, turn over a cow patty, and or maybe 100 or 1,000 or whatever you got to do, and get yourself some worms, and put them in your compost pile and start from there.
Yeah, absolutely. I know one of the things, we've got the greenhouse, and so I'd love to build some worm bins in the greenhouse, and we do heat that. So the minimum temp it gets in there is like 34 degrees. The maximum, though, obviously, we're in Ohio, so we're in the 90s. And then inside the greenhouse, obviously, it could get hotter. So, maybe that's not the best place to put those, or maybe they should only be in there seasonally.
It's okay as long as you irrigate them. So we use we do actually store some in a greenhouse as well, but primarily when we like outdoor, it's just, logistically speaking, when you're producing tons of this stuff, you need to go outdoors. Or you bet there are many benefits to doing so. Overhead, I don't know what this type of irrigation is, or I'm not an irrigation guy, but there are these tiny little sprinklers that they sit on these sticks, and they have like a really, really small feeder line. Yep. And I don't know what the gallons per minute is or whatever, but it's very, very light. And I just put them on a timer, and, keeping them hydrated means they're going to be active. You obviously don't want to overhydrate them, because then you're now getting leachate. And leachate is an indication that your bin is overhydrated. Okay. So and that's not always necessarily a bad thing. If you wanted, for example, my customer, we sell hungry bins. Full disclosure there, that's something that we do. Or any type of flow through bin, you can produce a liquid fertilizer. Think of it almost like an extract by just pouring dechlorinated water, ideally rainwater, over the top of your worm bin. And then whatever comes out the bottom, you're going to get soil food web members. You're going to get, in the case of a very mature bin, you're going to get lots of humates, your humic and fulvic acid, which are key, in how plants eat. So that's something not to be overlooked. So in the context of a commercial farmer who wants to produce worm castings, you don't want that leachate happening, right? That's your precious value leaving your bins. So think about that when you're composting as well, right? Every time that pile gets overhydrated, you're losing fertility. Yes. So, maybe you got to put a lot of thought into where you put those compost piles, ideally in a back corner somewhere near trees, near a forest, undercover. Otherwise, if you couldn't do that, you want to cover them. And this applies to worm bins. You want to cover them and make sure that they stay at that optimal hydration until you're ready for harvest.
Mm-hmm. All right. So what do worms now want to eat?
So they're compost worm. They love poo. That's their jam.
Manure worms. Yeah.
They love cow patty. Like cow poop is their absolute favorite, but they will eat anything that's decaying. And here's something kind of interesting that, when I learned, I was like, oh, I thought they ate food, but they don't. They actually eat soil food web members. So, nematodes, protozoa, amoeba, bacteria, fungi, they eat all these things. And so what's really happening is when you put, like, people will say, don't feed onions to your worms. Well, don't feed raw onions, a rotted onion that's been rotted by the right kind of microorganisms is very palatable to a compost worm. Same with any kind of food. So you're really looking for bacteria and fungi and things to break these foods down. And the exception is they don't really like fats. They don't like high protein. Not raw. Like they'll take it later. You think of a thermophilic compost pile. You've turned it, and the bones and the meat and the fats and then your vinegars and all this kind of stuff that might be in there. It gets normalized, and then the compost worms will get in there and they'll do their thing. But in a concentrated setting like a worm bin, there's some pretty standard no-nos, like people avoid citrus and onions, and 100% they avoid your meat and your dairy and your fats, and that's because they're going to attract black flies, which is really not a bad thing, because those guys get in. They do anything that's in your compost pile is a good thing. They're in there eating and pooping, and that's what you want. But if you have a worm bin and you have it in your home, or maybe you're in a like I live in a strata, I live in a condominium. My farm is a few kilometers away, so I have a balcony and I've got my worm bin out there and I've got another one inside. We don't want to attract those undesirables. So you want to avoid those foods. And like I said, the worms just they don't have teeth. They don't have the means to take a steak and take it apart, right? They need someone to get in there first. And the result is, if anyone's found anything in their refrigerator that they forgot about, what that smells like.
Yes. Okay, so then let's go back to this microgreen tray system that I'm looking at. It'd be more helpful if I could break all that up before the worms got a hold of it.
Yes, we use a compost shredder. It's a really neat device made by a company called Filamaker, Filamaker, out of Germany. It's pretty expensive to import, but they make custom. Think of a paper shredder. It's a much larger version of that. Another really popular way of mechanically stressing food and breaking it down is think of like a flail mower. Most people are familiar with that. You can buy a commercial product that will effectively slam the food with rotating chains as you run the food through to pulverize it. And another low-tech way is to just freeze it. And so that effect of the freeze thaw will cause and break a lot of the bonds. And so that's something that we love to give to people to try. Put your food in the freezer, and then when maybe your worm bin can't handle your volume, well, freeze it, and then when you can piece feed it as you go. And another way is through fermentation. So bokashi is an excellent way, and it's a little bit more, I'd say that's more in the advanced technique realm, because it's very acidic. So you want to make sure that your bokashi is fermented properly. You're not putting rotten food in there. You're working with fresh ingredients ideally, and then you're making sure that your system is draining out those acids, and that you're taking that sort of bokashi leachate and you're using that as a liquid feed, heavily diluted, but getting it out of that food waste, so that when you feed that fermented food to your worms, they can go to work on it without I've killed worms like, oh man, when I first tried feeding bokashi, I murdered about 12 pounds in a bin, and I just dumped it in, right? Didn't really think about it too much, and they weren't too happy about that. So definitely a little bit more of an advanced technique, but it works wonders. And for anyone, there is no one type of composting that's the holy grail. They all have a context, and a worm bin, because of its advantages, is a must-have. I think everyone should have it, but it also has disadvantages. You can't, from a home, like from a waste management perspective of trying to help homeowners out, meat and dairy and that kind of thing, that could be 20-30% of someone's food waste. So bokashi really answers that system, and I like to encourage our customers to use both. And that's something that we produce a gardening course, an online gardening course, and that's what we recommend to people.
Gotcha. So we've got about feeding it. Now let's talk about taking off the worm castings. I know that's something that some people struggle with is, obviously there's worms in the worm castings. How do you make sure that you separate them? What ways have you found that work for smaller systems?
That's why we like the hungry bin or a continuous flow or a flow through bin, because what happens is compost worms only like to live in the top 12, maybe 18 inches. They're top dwellers. So in a system like the hungry bin, they will stay on the top. And when you pull the harvest tray off the bottom, or in a larger flow through bin, when you pull your there's like a knife plate that's dragged through the bottom and it scrapes off an inch layer or 2 inch layer. That way you're just getting pure castings. And there might be 1 or 2 worms down there that found their way down there, but the bulk of your, like 99.999% of your worms are upstairs, and that's what you want. And that's why it's such a great, the flow through bin is such a great style. And a worm tower, like the Worm Factory 360, and there's others, they would qualify as that type of a bin, so they're a little bit more challenging with the worm towers, because you have to be patient while you put your new food in your top tray, and then you're really waiting for those worms to leave the bottom tray and get hungry and move their way up. So that type of a system, you have to be paying attention to what you're feeding your worms and how well they're processing that food. And then it really is the best way, right? Because you're not getting dirty, you're not sifting. But for the really basic person, one of the things we teach in the gardening course is just a 5-gallon pail or a Rubbermaid bin. And we like those gold classifier. You think of gold, those gold classifying trays.
Okay.
You can get them, and they fit perfectly over a 5-gallon pail, and the trays actually fit inside of each other. So you can start with a 1/4 inch, and then you can have an 1/8 inch underneath, and then you just put your worms and your cocoons and your whatever it could be. There could still be undigested food, and you give it a good sift, right? And if the moisture has been reduced at 80%, that's not going to fly. It's just going to be mucky goo. So you typically get a tarp and you throw it out and you onto the tarp, and then you let it dry a little bit. The worms will scurry down because they don't like the light. And so as you can see, this quickly becomes time consuming, right? It quickly becomes not really commercially viable, or just means that you need to do additional things in order to process your castings out. So there are many ways to do it, but I think getting a flow through style is going to be the easiest. But hey, there's learning opportunities too when you do get your hands dirty and you do the sifting tray and things. I like to encourage teachers and school students and things, try that method, because you get to see the cocoons, you get to see what's going on, and the smells and everything. It's good to know.
Gotcha. Where are you on your thriving farmer journey? If you go to growingfarmers.com, you can click on our assessment, take our assessment, it's just a few questions, and what it will do is show you exactly where you are on the 5-stage thriving farmer journey. And what this will do then is give you some next steps, some resources to help you know what to focus on next in your business to move you to the next level with your farm. All right. So then, we talked about a couple different ways you use it. Obviously, folks that are doing, let's say, everything from house plants can just toss them in there up to even large scale. Now, can you also use worm castings to kind of like inoculate your other compost as well?
Yes, 100%. Anytime you're starting a compost pile, you want to inoculate it with some aged compost, and think of vermicompost as the end stage of a thermophilic compost. So after it's gone mesophilic, and now it's gone even room temp. There's going to be, if it was done outside and the worms were in there, that's what you want, and that's where you're going to get the most advanced set of microbial diversity, and that's really what you want. Everyone needs to understand how compost works. It's got nothing to do with NPK. Absolutely. Zero. There might be some in there and it might feed a little bit, but it's, worm castings are typically like 111 or less. It's all about the soil food web, and they have no problem fixing nitrogen out of the air. There are free living nitrogen fixing bacteria. I mean, go take a look at any mountain, go take a look at a forest. Who is fertilizing those massive trees? I mean, we live in a rainforest, as I mentioned, and I thought there's got to be a better way. I mean, everyone's fixated on nitrogen, you know. There's 78% nitrogen in the air or something like that, really close. So it makes sense to get those microbes that are capable of pulling that out of the air and getting them into your compost pile. And I would recommend looking up a guy by the name of Jean Pain, Pain. I don't speak French very well, so that guy, he's dead now, but he's from France, and he was built these compost piles from shreddings. He built his own wood chipper, and they were having fire issues in the forest, and so I think he got some money from the government, and he was basically clearing brush and making sure that these forests were free of this debris, too much debris on the ground. And he was building these massive compost piles, building a heat exchanger out of them, and also with an anaerobic vessel in the center was producing natural gas. And he was using that natural gas to run his vehicles, and he was using the hot water to heat his home. And these piles that he would build, they would go for 18 months. And there was no nitrogen added, zero, just the initial leaves that might have been in there. So where did all that nitrogen come from, right? It came from the air, and it's this, you know, that Kevin Costner movie, Field of Dreams, right? If you build it, they will come. If you withhold it, nature will bring it. It will find a way in most cases. So that's the fascinating thing about what we call it, the patient man's compost. When about Jean's type of compost, and that's it's a very high lignin fungal dominant compost, and obviously 18 months is a very long time to wait for your compost. So you have to take that with a grain of salt and really you got to prepare, right?
Or build lots of compost piles.
Bingo.
And just realize it's going to take a long time. Yeah.
I mean, think about your market garden and how much you've got, and think about how much you lose to pest pressure. And if you're someone who's spraying chemicals, think about how much you're spending on that, and more, think about your health and the health of the people who you are feeding. You shouldn't be using those things. So maybe allocating some of your space to composting, if you added it all up long term, maybe that's the sustainable path. Even though you might not produce as much, maybe you don't even make as much, but you'll be producing a higher quality food. So then maybe you could actually charge more. I don't know, but we found that it's working for us, and we're not rich. I drive a beat up Mazda 3, and I don't see myself being like a really wealthy man from a monetary standpoint, but I see myself being wealthy in health and in knowing that these types of activities are key for the future of our planet. Like, there has to be a way of some kind of, it's going to get a little bit philosophical, but there's got to be a better way. Money is obviously something. This ability to transfer wealth is very important, but there needs to be some way to do this better, and I think it starts with just being self-sufficient, at least to 60 miles. I think that's sort of a reasonable range to source your things from and to sell to.
Well, I think we have to look at, it's unfortunate that, if you were to actually sell like 5 acres of incredibly rich ground, developers don't look at that. And obviously you don't never sell to a developer, but people typically don't look at that as a sign of health. I mean, you don't list, the listing on Zillow isn't like, soil organic matter 4.2. And he's got, this many worms, because we did a grid study of the backyard. But I think obviously if there is, and again, this is obviously really going philosophical, if there is some sort of great reset in the next decade where, things really change up and it all comes back to, what you can grow and what you can make, because that's what's really valued, I think that metric is going to completely flip.
100%. Michael, when we got flooded, and for anyone who's listening, go look up BC floods, it was bad. I remember hearing the call, the dike is broken, and it had broken in two places. And,
Sheesh.
You can argue that maybe we shouldn't have dikes and this and that, and we shouldn't be living there. And it used to be a lake. It really did.
Yeah.
But the reality is it's extremely fertile farmland. And that's what was going on. And man, you should have seen the panic buying. It was already bad from COVID. I mean, we had a toilet paper shortage. I don't know if you guys did, but
we did. Yes.
Kind of funny that was
ironically,
but that's what people in this area value. Myself, I think just go buy a bidet and call it a day. But anyway, man, the run on food was incredible. And, I was sitting there and I was very concerned. I was like watching my shipping container. It was about half an inch from floating away like Noah's Ark.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And I'm thinking, oh my God, what have I this is my whole life just floating away. But I wasn't worried about food.
Yes. Yeah.
So, disaster affects everybody, but I wasn't worried about food. And I just sort of sat there, and there's a market, the property that I'm on, there's a market, and they sell, I'm co-located on a farm, and they have a market there, and people were just like, wow, just the look on their face and their urgency. I had not seen that. I've never seen that before. And it was eye-opening. And I just thought, you know what? I'm so glad I started market gardening. I'm so glad I know how to grow food. And I'm so glad I know how to grow really good food with a long storage life. And this is important for anyone who's listening. Your trace elements and your minerals and the way you grow your food will shape and affect the shelf life like drastically, and that's key, because as this climate stuff continues, it's coming. I mean, just a few weeks ago, I had to what? Colorado's on fire? It's the middle of winter. And I think 170, 200 homes. I don't know. It was just, that's wild. I don't think we've seen the least of it yet. So being prepared to look after yourself and look after your community, it's a no-brainer. And then, we saw a lot of bartering going on here while we were basically an island. The highway was shut down. We couldn't get in or out. We couldn't get to the States. We couldn't get to the harbor. We're about 60 miles away from the port of Vancouver and the city of Vancouver. And, we're actually right at the Sumas border, but nothing was happening because it was a giant flood. And that was just, something to think about is, okay, well, what have you got? You got some diesel? Okay, I got some of this and this and that, and it was like, that felt easy. And so I think maybe in the future will be some kind of a hybrid of sharing, but certainly, these are talents. They haven't been forgotten. We can thank probably the Amish and those types of religious groups, in the various parts of the world who have said, and maybe it was a bit extreme. They reject technology, but thanks to them, a lot of these knowledge is still here, and we can pick it up and we can apply it to our context and have success. Nature's such a very generous thing, as we know, and if you commit yourself to working with nature, and you'll be successful, and we can get out of this. We can if we turn this around, and it starts with vote with your dollars, right? Where you spend your money, choose to spend your money with someone who is close to you, even if it costs you more. In fact, all the more so if it costs you more. That money is staying in your community. And that's something that as a young person, I really didn't understand. I just thought, well, I'm poor. Low price is the most important. And it's not. You're hurting yourself. And that's the modern kind of capitalistic society that we live in, this consumption culture, that it's been engineered that way, and we just can't keep doing it. We've got to start save your seed. Think about it. Regionally adapted seed, that's the holy grail, man. I mean, we have we've done this the farm that I mentioned earlier, Local Harvest. They lost a lot of food to that flood, and then they lost more food to the freeze. But very, very cool is that there were their beds are, I think they're 5 foot wide and 300 foot long, something like that. They had this one section where they're Savoy cabbages, And this one section survived. So guess what? Those are going to go to seed. We're going to save those seeds. And now we've got regionally adapted seeds that, for whatever reason, they could handle that cold. And so there's all these little advantages that come when you start doing things locally, and you learn to depend on yourself, or at least your local community. You're going to benefit.
Yeah. Now, I want to go back to something you said a little bit earlier about, the quality of your soil and the length of shelf life. So we can consistently get 2 weeks plus on our salad mix because we have better soils. And again, I feel like our soils are still not all the way there. We still have a long ways to go. But I'm really excited to see, what we can get to when we're looking at, super high organic matters and, the right soil food web underneath the soil. So, but yeah, I feel so many folks, they start to scale and they say, well, I'll just do 20 acres of produce. But if you were to take the effort and put all the fertility and all the effort you would put into that 20 acres on just 1 or 2 acres, a lot of the time that you could actually grow more on those couple acres than you could the whole macro scale, just because fertility is a huge thing that so many farmers under realize.
They do. And I just look at the world and I see, I've been to Saskatchewan, which is a big farming region. A lot of our wheat's grown here in Canada, very, very big. My wife's members of her family farm there, and we drove for like 20 minutes. We passed a house, and he's like, that could be yours. And we were still on it. We were still on this man's property. I mean, think of the hectares and hectares and hectares and hectares. And it's just him and his wife, a bunch of really expensive machines, and a couple of kids. That's just crazy to me. When there's so many people who, you think of the mental health issues today. I've had my own struggle. I started partying, and I didn't quit partying for about a decade, and I came out of that with some mental health issues. I just had a really hard time feeling fulfilled and satisfied. And man, when I started gardening the natural way, I noticed just better GI health, right? Because that was initially my goal, but also improved mental health. And we know now there's a lot of information coming out that the two are just very, very intimately related. So that's something that, you think about modern society, it's like, yeah, you have 20 acres, but can you farm 20 acres sustainably? Yes, if you're maybe doing cattle and you're grazing them and you're moving them around and things like that. But as far as like growing food, I mean, why not take your property and split it up into 1 or 2 acre segments and get people in your community growing on there, because people need work. People need good work that is very rewarding work. And is there any more noble cause than feeding, your local community? I mean, when it comes down to it, I know, I remember as a kid, I used to watch the show Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. And you remember that guy with it? I don't know if you've seen that. This guy with this wicked English accent. And I just, just beautiful. And just ritzy, posh, really, really posh kind of lifestyle. And that's what, now you fast forward to today, the kind of, the Kardashian lifestyle that, everybody wants to be a king or a prince or a queen or whatever. And it's like, hang on a minute. What's wrong with just being a peasant? Like, let me tell you, some of the best wine and some of the best food I've ever had has come from some of the dirtiest hands you've ever seen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that, to me, that's the real wealth. Who can feed you? Who can, who can nourish you? That's the new flex, right?
Yes. Now you got a picture on your Instagram of supplying worm castings and worms to a vineyard. Talk to us a little bit about that. Were they actually pouring the worms right into where the base of the plants?
So we did. Yeah. So we did a test there. Now that's a beautiful farm that was previously a horse. It's a riding arena, and they had horses there for a long, long time. So think very, very rich in organic matter as those horses were out in the field. And so that's why they chose to grow there. And they were having some issues as the climate has continued to change here. They don't irrigate. And so one of the advantages of worm castings is that they, and just, increasing organic matter naturally, having high levels of humus, you retain water. And so we did a test in their in the sections of their vineyard where it was struggling. It was an old riverbed that kind of ran through there, in a river like creek, and it was very rocky. And so what was happening is the water was just not staying. And so what we did is we took our vermicompost, which we just on its own right, a properly made vermicompost or worm casting will retain water. And we add to that biochar and some other things that really help try to just keep the nutrients and keep the water in that area. And so that was what we did to try and see if those vines would improve. And that was a really generous thing for them to let us try. That was really right at the beginning when we started to produce commercially. I had seen myself. I'm a balcony grower, and I grow cherry tomatoes, and I just love them. They're amazing. If you want a delicious tomato, everybody knows a cherry is going to have the most flavor, generally speaking. So I had was used to what they were, and then I put the worm castings in there, and I just was blown away with the flavor. And so that's something that when you think about wine, it's all about the flavor. And that it really comes from the trace elements, the minerals, the presence of diverse biology, and so we saw some pretty neat results there. And I actually have if you go on our Instagram, the owner of that winery gave me the remaining Pinot Gris that they planted that year. We applied it as topically to some existing vines that were probably 6 or 8 years old, and we also applied it at transplant, which is the ideal time. And if you go on Instagram and you go through there, you'll see there's a picture of a Pinot Gris. It's grafted onto some French stock for disease protection, so that the stalks, you might notice that. But if you look at the left one, look at the roots, the size of that root ball, right? So a big root ball, for those who don't know, means more contact with the soil. It means more biology. It means more water. It's a pro. You want strong root growth underneath. And then you look at the one on the right, and you'll see it's about 30% less. And it's just from the worm castings. And so not only did the one on the left fruit in its first season, which is pretty unusual when you're transplanting grapes, but it has this substantially thicker stem. It's got a whole extra stem of growth, and really phenomenal. And the interesting thing is that in that experiment, we planted them in compacted clay, a section of our market garden lab that was previously farmed with heavy machinery, and they do cow corn. And so it was quite compacted, but we did it the same for both of them. And only one got about a half cup to a cup of worm castings. And I mean, the results, they speak for themselves. You've got a 20 to 30% increase in root ball. And when you see healthy roots like that, I mean, it pays itself forward in the whole rest of the growth of that plant, in its vitality, its ability to reduce pest pressure. And Rhonda Sherman goes into quite a bit of detail. I mean, I'm not going to really talk about it on this podcast, because you should go read her book. She has done a lot of great research into the advantages for different crops and things. But suffice to say, right, we look at nature, we want to imitate nature. In nature, the compost worms, they're surface dwellers. They love a good mulch layer, and they're in there to take decomposing plant matter, and what comes out of their butt is what I would say, it's not poo, it's soil. They poop soil, and there are growth hormones in there like auxin, AUXIN. You Google that. Phenomenal impact to the plants. And so that's what the vineyard owner was looking for. It's what we're looking for. It's what everybody's looking for. I want to see my plants be as resilient as possible. And in a market garden context, it's really hard. You have to make a conscious decision between, well, I'm going to take this whole row and I'm going to dedicate it to not a cash crop, but not necessarily a traditional cover crop either. It's a crop to feed the soil food web. Maybe it's multi-purpose. Maybe it's blocking wind, maybe it's providing shade, maybe it's just attracting birds, right? So the smaller you are, the harder it is. And introducing a really high quality compost, or introducing high quality vermicompost, worm castings into your growing operation is going to help with your pest pressure. It's not a panacea. You really need to look to improve the diversity of what you're growing on your farm, and to make sure that you've provided the habitat for those predatory insects and predators, like the higher order soil food web members, like birds.
Yeah.
Don't forget, those things poop too. So they're in there, they're eating, and they're helping you out, and they're providing fertility to your garden. So although you're losing space and you might be producing less, you're going to be producing more in higher quality, so with less trouble. So maybe it evens out. I don't know. I in our experience, it's worked out quite well.
Mm-hmm. And the book you recommended right there again was the Worm Farmer's Handbook.
Yeah.
By Rhonda Sherman. And that's Chelsea Green is the publisher on that. So you can check that out online. Well, this has been fabulous. I've learned so much about worms, and I got some great takeaways. Talk to me a little bit about where can folks find out more about you and the work you do?
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate the opportunity to do that. So that farmer that originally taught me that course, Dan, when COVID hit, he reached out to me and he said, look, man, I'm not going to do the gardening course this year because I can't, because it was always in person. And he said, I'd like to do virtual. And so we got together and we started to produce an online gardening course. And so if you go to localharvestgardening.com, that's the website for it. There's an Instagram as well, and you can find the course outline. It's broken into 3 modules, and this course, we have myself as a composting person. We have Dan, who's the gardener, the market gardener, with his experience, and then we have an edible landscape designer. And the 3 of us have put our talents together to try and provide a comprehensive course that implements things from Korean natural farming, from permaculture, from just everywhere that there's someone doing something where they work with nature. That's what we're doing, and we've tried to provide it. I'm very, very fortunate because Dan and Jack both used to be school teachers.
Okay.
And so they've done a really great job in taking this information and making it understandable. And it's applicable no matter where you live on the planet, no matter what zone you're in. The focus of what we demonstrate is Zone 7, coastal BC. But this knowledge is transferable anywhere. If you commit yourself to working with nature, you'll win. And in the composting section, about 1/3 of the course is dedicated to composting, soil building. We show you how to make and build really great thermophilic compost, bokashi compost, vermicompost, and also composting in place, mulching, all of these techniques to build soil fertility. We do extracts and things. So if you're looking to be guided, as you learn, I think there's something there for you. And certainly, we would be honored to have anyone come join our little journey and get this information out to the world at large.
Well, yeah, thank you very much, Andrew. And I'm sure people can also reach out to you through email if they have more questions about composting and that sort of thing, or is the best way to go just directly through your website?
Yeah, if you want to connect, I'm a social guy. I love people. I'm very busy these days, but I really make an effort to get in touch with everyone. My Instagram is probably where I am the most, and that's TerraFloraOrganics.com, or so that's the website. Also the Instagram, just Terra Flora Organics. And if you go on there, I'm pretty responsive. An email, terrafloraorganics@gmail.com. I'll definitely, I do consulting. So if someone really is like, they're looking for some commercial help, can help you with that. If you got a question, I'll do my best. I have a lot of information that I like to share with people. There's a lot of great information on the web. And I'm sure if I don't know, I'll try my best to help you out, because this this, obviously I'm in business, but this is a community-driven movement. It's a global movement. We all need to work with each other to help each other. All that I know, I got for free. I had to work to get it, to learn it, to apply it. And, I learned some things, and I'm hoping to add value back to sort of, add my little bit to pay it forward.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again so much for coming on today, Andrew, and wish you the best in all your composting endeavors.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I really appreciate the invite, and thank you to your team. You guys are just so courteous and organized and professional. It's been a real pleasure. Hopefully we can talk again in the future.
Absolutely. Hey, Thriving Farmers, have you checked us out on YouTube lately? We have a bunch of new content there, including a few rants by me. I want to tell you, you don't want to miss them. I actually go rant about, some of the problems I see in our space and some of the challenges I see farmers facing. So go check that out. We've got instructional videos over there as well. Talk about setting up our new farm here in Ohio and all the steps we're going to do that, as well as just tutorials and tips on best practices for all sorts of things on the farm. So go ahead, check over at Growing Farmers on YouTube and see the new content we put together for you. So there you have it, another episode in the books. So I'd love if you would hop on over to iTunes and leave us a rating and a review. Those mean everything to us. We love to hear what you're thinking. If you have a podcast guest that you can recommend, please pop on over to the Thriving Farmer Podcast website and leave us a review. That's thrivingfarmerpodcast.com.